Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On today's episode, I am pleased to be joined by David Gray-Hammond to discuss autism and drug addiction, harmful stereotypes regarding schizophrenia, and how meditation has helped him. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. David, thanks so much for joining me here today on Autism Stories.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start off by just learning, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
That's a bit of a complicated question for me because realistically, it started before I can even remember because my mother tried to have me diagnosed autistic as a young child. But because she worked with autistic children, they accused her of being an over-anxious mother with too much knowledge of the subject. It wasn't actually until much later in life that it became something that would later be diagnosed. And the problem was I'd gone through school and all the trauma associated with that, along with a lot of other trauma. And at the age of 18, I started hearing voices. I was experiencing paranoia. I turned to drugs and alcohol. And over the years, I would still get my bachelor's degree, but I would finish that 4 years at university with a horrendous addiction to opioids, spice, and benzodiazepines, among other things. And one of the things that started to become obvious is that I wasn't typical of the people being treated by the substance misuse service, but the service, the mental health service and similar, wouldn't assess me for anything whilst I was using drugs and alcohol. So on the 7th of April 2016, I had my first sober day, having done a month in a psychiatric hospital detoxing and then detoxing further in the community. And by the following November, I was being assessed by the neurodevelopmental team and I was diagnosed autistic very quickly. I was supposed to have 3 2-hour assessments. 45 minutes into the first assessment, they'd already diagnosed me. And that was really where my journey in the autistic community started, because I, truthfully, at the time, I was full of a lot of internalized ableism, and I kind of wanted my autism to be made to go away. But I also was aware there was a lot of quackery, let's say, around treatments, in inverted commas, for autism. And I remember I'd done a bit of writing online because I enjoyed writing, and someone called Emma Dalmain found a blog post I'd written about the use of bleach as an autism cure, and I'd basically written about why it was wrong and abusive. And Emma invited me into a Facebook group she ran, and that was my first real interaction with the autistic community. Prior to that, I'd just seen a couple of Facebook pages. And whilst I was in that group, I started writing for Neuroplastic and eventually became their chief operating officer. I also started my own blog, Emergent Divergence. And I'd realized at the time that there was a lot of talking about what it was like to be autistic. There wasn't a lot of talking about what it was like to be autistic and experience complex mental health issues, such as my own with the voice hearing and the psychosis. And there was no discussion of substance use amongst autistic people. And I started writing about it on my blog, and I started a Facebook page called Emergent Divergence, where I shared my writing, and very quickly people started really resonating with what I was writing, because despite the fact this wasn't a widely talked about subject, it was something that affected a great number of autistic people. over the years, it's developed, and now I do speaking engagements at conferences all around the world. I've written 4 books, 2 full-length books and 2 chapbooks. My blog is still going. This year, it's had nearly 200,000 visitors. I do a podcast called David's Diverging Discussions. I work with Academy. I do their live streams and their especially interesting podcast. I'm in very high demand now. And really, I owe that to the autistic community, because when I first came into this community, I wasn't convinced I had anything to offer, and I wasn't convinced my sobriety would last. But it was through that unconditional acceptance and support that I got from other autistic people that I was able to become the person I am today.
Yeah, I learned about you because you're a very talented writer, followed your blog, and you mentioned writing 4 books. I wanted to ask you about your book, Unusual Medicine Essays on Autistic Identity and Drug Addiction. I'm wondering about the intersection of autism and drug addiction. Are there signs that look different for us as autistic people that we might be heading down to that road of addiction or are already there?
So there's certainly some unique aspects to having an addiction as an autistic person. We often have interoceptive differences, with interoception being that sense that allows us to identify the feelings within our body, which in turn allows us to identify and articulate our emotions. So often we don't know what we're feeling, is the simple way of putting it. So if we're really struggling, we might turn to something like drug use as an almost like a form of interoceptive stimming. We're not sure what we're feeling, so we will induce a feeling that we can recognize. I think particularly also when you're autistic and ADHD together, for me as an autistic and ADHD person, I like things that can be done quickly. And drug use for me was instant relief. When I was at my darkest moments, I could switch it off by taking a pill or snorting a line or smoking something. It gave me that instant response that I didn't have to be patient with. I think also there are elements of socializing involved. It makes it easier to socialize when you're under the influence of substances. It can take away some of the sensory impact of the environments that people tend to socialize in. But in particular, one that was really big for me was around identity. Now, growing up, what I had come to learn was that my autistic identity was wrong. It was undesirable. People wanted me to be something else. I actually found that me as a drug user was more acceptable. Me as an addict was more acceptable. I had a group of friends, or at least I thought they were friends, who I had things in common with. We had shared interests in drugs and alcohol. Using drugs and alcohol, becoming addicted, allowed me to exchange an identity that I felt wasn't well accepted and wasn't keeping me safe, for one that brought me some semblance of community.
For people and services that want to better support autistic people in regards to drug addiction, what would be some of your suggestions to them?
So first of all, I would highlight there's an issue called the double empathy problem. So non-autistic people under the double empathy problem struggle to empathize with autistic people and vice versa, because we have fundamentally different cultural experiences. We experience the world differently and we cannot understand each other's experience. So neither side has a deficit in empathy. They just have different cultural experiences of the world. But this goes further. Emerging research this year actually suggests a triple empathy thing. What this discusses, and the research study I believe is by Shaw et al. 2023, what this highlights is that you have that mismatch in empathy between autistic and non-autistic people, but there's also a third dimension to it where professional to non-professional. Professionals have their own culture and approach to things. They have their own experiences. And the thing is yes, you could say that a professional may experience being on the other side of their profession, but they would be doing it through the lens of being that professional and having that knowledge of that professional culture. So they can't fully understand what it is like to be an autistic person coming into that professional environment and asking for support from those professionals, which means you get this breakdown in communication and empathy. And that can make it incredibly challenging to have success within professional services that are supporting autistic drug users and alcoholics. I would also say there are other things that professionals need to know about. For example, there's the theory of monotropism, which is being quite widely accepted now as explaining a lot of the aspects of autism and ADHD. There's even been some suggestions that it explains schizophrenia, which, as a schizophrenic myself, I must say I resonate a lot with the monotropism theory with regards to my experience of being schizophrenic. Monotropism states that we tend towards singular detailed attention tunnels, and we don't cope well with rapid transitions between demands, and we struggle to regulate how much attention we give to demands when we are faced with multiple incoming demands. Professionals need to be aware that recovery is a multifaceted endeavor, and we need to be able to focus on one part at a time. We can't necessarily focus on all the moving parts that are involved in recovery, which can make it inaccessible. Then there's more simple things. You know, the environments at treatment centers can be quite uncomfortable from a sensory perspective. And on the topic of sensory stuff, again, professionals need to be aware of things like interoceptive differences, proprioceptive differences, vestibular differences. You know, it's more than just the 5 senses we're taught in school. There are 8 in total. It's really important that professionals have a good, rounded understanding of all of them. I would also say that something that really needs to be looked at by professionals is the risk of criminal exploitation. Autistic people are vulnerable to exploitation because sometimes we're trusting, sometimes we're so desperate to have human connection that we will do things that we don't agree with for the sake of having that human connection. Professionals working with autistic substance users need to be aware that there may be an extra layer of complexity in that that person could be victim of criminal exploitation, and that will make the recovery process much harder.
Now, you also wrote a book called A Treatise on Chaos, Embracing the Chaotic Self and the Art of Neuroqueering. In this book, you explore your experiences with psychedelics, meditation, and psychosis, and consider how these were transformative experiences for you and how they inform your neuroqueer lifestyle. As someone who meditates almost on a daily basis, I'm really wondering how you look at the connection of meditation and your neuroqueer practices.
Well, neuroqueering is all about subverting normativity. It's about going against the grain. It's about fundamentally distorting your performance of yourself away from what is expected or told to be normal. And so for me, meditation allows me to explore the potential I have to be something. So when I meditate, I can focus on here's what my brain has learned I should be doing, and here is what I could be doing. When I meditate, I make the connection with myself and I explore the potential that I have within me. This sits sort of on the other side to that of the psychedelics I talk about in the book, which really underpin the experiences I had with my connection to the world around me. Now, I don't use psychedelics anymore, but when I did, it was very much about the connection to the world around me, the universe I lived in. Meditation teaches me how to neuroqueer with regards to myself. Psychedelics taught me how to neuroqueer with regards to my connection to others, the universe around me. And psychosis, whilst terrifying, taught me what the relationship I had was with the power structures in society. And the three of them come together to form a transformative experience, which allows me to challenge my neuronormative ideas, the internalized normativity that I have, and explore the where the real limits lie in what I can be.
You're just mentioning, like neuronormative ideas and things like that. Is that something like on a daily basis you're still kind of like processing? I know you mentioned earlier about having internalized ableism prior to learning about your autism. I think that's, common experience for a lot of us. So I'm just wondering how that works for you.
Absolutely. I believe that we are all constantly fighting internalized ableism and neuronormativity because there are so many layers sort of indoctrinated into us over the years as we grow up and change in this society. If you imagine that every interaction we have with the world fundamentally changes who we are at our core, even if it's just a tiny bit. And I refer to this as the chaotic self. So it's the self that is constantly moving, growing, changing with each interaction. Now, many of these interactions may be positive and help us be ourselves more authentically, but also we will be taking on board those interactions where people are throwing their ableist ideas at us, their neuronormativity at us. And so we can unpick the neuronormativity, we can unpick the ableism within us, but there will be new layers being added to us with each interaction that we have. So we have to constantly be working on understanding where we sit with regards to the ableism and neuronormativity that exists within the world, because it is inescapable in our current society.
And David, how can our listeners learn more about and purchase your books?
So my books are available on Amazon. They're also available at Barnes and Noble and Waterstones, as well as a few other outlets. There are some links on my website, emergentdivergence.com. If you go to the My Books section, there's details about how to purchase my books. On Amazon, they are available in most major Amazon territories. And they, like I said, they're also available at Waterstones in the UK, Barnes and Nobles in the US, and I believe they're also available at some other outlets around the world as well. Yeah, there's also a link to a book about autistic advocacy that I was featured in, but I didn't author myself.
Now, none of us are just autistic. We have many other identities. And one of the identities you mentioned earlier was being schizophrenic. What would you say are some stereotypes or things you just wish people wouldn't do in regards to your schizophrenia?
So the biggest one is that people assume that we're psycho, in inverted commas, or that we're dangerous. So schizophrenic people, yeah, I hear voices, I see things that aren't there, I experience delusions. Statistically, schizophrenic people are more likely to be victims of violent crime than perpetrators. And this is something that's often misunderstood. The other one that's often misunderstood is schizophrenia is not split personality disorder. There's this sort of misinformation out there that it's to do with having multiple personalities, because schizo in schizophrenia stands for split and the phrenia stands for mind. So it literally translates as split mind, but it's actually not that. What you can understand it as is a split from our shared reality. When I'm under particularly high periods of stress, my brain will invent its own version of reality. And this has included lots of things. I've had beliefs that I'm trapped inside computer simulations, that I have superhuman powers. I've had beliefs that my thoughts are being broadcast out loud. I heard multiple voices talking to me, including voices that don't talk to me directly, but talk to each other about what I'm doing, making constant commentary. I've heard voices coming out of TVs and radios. You know, it can be very unnerving, and it is truly a terrifying experience sometimes. But one of the things I really like to get across is, and not everyone agrees on this, but this is how it is for me personally, I don't view it as an illness. I view it as a form of acquired neurodivergence. My brain works differently, is wired differently, because it has been queered by trauma. So with that neuroqueer theory, we think about queering our neurology intentionally. Well, for me, schizophrenia is the result of my neurology being queered by trauma.
Anyone that is a guest here on Autism Stories and also hosts a podcast, I feel compelled to talk to them about it. So, in thinking about that, you host a podcast called David's Divergent Discussions. What types of topics do you consider to be part of Divergent Discussions?
Truthfully, I think there's very little that isn't relevant to David's Divergent Discussions. Because as neurodivergent people, we are also humans. We have human experiences. The only difference is we have it through that neurodivergent lens. So really, I feel very free to talk about anything with my guests because anything we talk about through the lens of neurodivergence. Now, we've talked about a lot of things on there. You know, we had a really good episode with the punk rock autistic talking about spirituality and all sorts of things like that. I've had Nick Walker on there talking about neuroqueer theory. I've had Katie Monday from Autistic and Living the Dream talking about mental health and community. I've had Tanya Adkin on there talking about parenting. I've had social workers such as Rachel Gavin on there talking about the law and the rights that autistic people have in the UK around mental health and social care. There are so many different topics we talk about, and I'm always open to new topics. So yeah, really, it's about realizing that David's Divergent Discussions is about human experiences, because that's what neurodivergent people have. We have human experiences. It's just that our experience may be slightly different because we process the world differently and the world treats us differently.
Well, David, I really appreciate your time today. I know you are in high demand, and I appreciate you taking some time to talk with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Thanks so much to David for the conversation. To learn more about David and his books, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. Here at Autism Personal Coach, our clients are the experts, our coaches are the guides. The majority of supports for autistics are not helpful. They try to fix us, not support us. That's why many are confused when we say our clients are the experts of their lived experience. Our clients are the experts for what has worked for them and about the things that they need and want in their lives. Our coaches first listen to our clients and then ask thoughtful questions, offer resources, and strategize with our clients so they can get what they need to thrive. Would you want a guide in your life to coach you to get you the things you desire? If so, then visit autismpersonalcoach.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism Stories, and if you did, if you could tell a friend, foe, or anyone you know about it so they could have the same enjoyable and educational experience as you when listening to Autism Stories, it would be very much appreciated. Till next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.